Hello. Hi. Welcome. Okay, cards on the table. I'm talking in a voiceover. My microphone's better that way. Sorry to spoil it. I love Christmas. You know what? Let's just show some images a bit so it's less awkward. I love Christmas. I was listening to a Christmas playlist as I wrote this script in the middle of June simply because those songs are so beautiful and nostalgic. Nostalgic? I never get that word right. I also love Christmas movies. So I wrote one. At least an outline for one. Then I made this animated storyboard as a pitch of sorts. I have a bit of a preamble, but if you want to skip right to the story, navigate to the time on your screen now. In this video, I will be giving you a detailed pitch for my Christmas action movie, Nick. Alternate title, The War on Christmas. I really like Nick. It was my original name for it, but The War on Christmas is definitely more interesting. You know, it has a little pop cultural reference, and it does tell you a bit more about the movie. I'm not married to either one, although I'm in an open relationship with Nick. There's also Claus versus Claus, which is certainly intriguing, but I'm less into that one. Anyway, I'm definitely not one to toot my own horn, but I actually think this would make a pretty cool movie. So, let's see if we can make it happen. Huh? Share it, like it, send it to celebrities. Yeah. The next big thing. Yeah, you know? The tagline is, can a disillusioned and de-brainwashed clone of Santa Claus save Christmas from a power-hungry Mrs. Claus? Does he even want to? How intriguing is that? It gets better. Hang tight. Just to make it easier to picture in terms of casting, cards on the table, I initially pictured David Harbour in the role when I came up with it a few years ago, but then a movie came out where he played Santa, so I'd probably have to toss him out. My other two castings would be either Nick Offerman or J.K. Simmons, both of whom would bring something different to the role. And if you want to see one of them, tweet at them relentlessly until they accept. Edit. Okay, crap. Turns out J.K. Simmons is already set to play a badass Santa in Red 1, so he's out too. Damn it. On the bright side, clearly I had my finger on the pulse when I came up with this idea several years ago because 2 of my 3 picks were chosen for a similar role. Hopefully I'm not too late to nab my boy Offerman, whose name works better anyway. He's Nick, eh? So, Nick Offerman it is. You know, unless literally anyone else goes, hey Ron, I'll do it, in which case, yeah, that works too. I'm not exactly in a position to be picky here, but I'll be picturing Offerman and using him in the animations. Oh, also, I'd totally be down to turn this into an animated film or graphic novel or something too, in which case we'd use different characters, obviously. I'm easy. Also, I'll be using AI art to bring it to life. And yes, I understand the irony of using AI art just after there were a bunch of protests about AI in Hollywood, but I think some schmuck making a YouTube concept video should be held to different standards than a Hollywood production company. It goes without saying, but I obviously wouldn't actually make this movie without their involvement. I'm not saying, hey, let's make an AI movie using the likenesses of these actors. That's not good. And also, as you will soon see, the software isn't there yet anyway, so it's a moot point. There are some really weird ones. Some of these animations look rough. And that was after a lot of work.
And the clarity is quite poor.
This is just an animated storyboard with the pie-in-the-sky goal of actually making a movie with these actors. That's the dream. The ludicrously unlikely dream. One other thing to note is that the AI seems to default to white characters, and if I try to prompt one character to be a certain race, they all become that race, so the cast will be largely depicted as white, but I would prefer a more diverse cast if this was made. Nothing against white people, but they're not the only people, you know? Okay, on to the story. We begin in the North Pole on December 24th. Things are pretty hectic. Santa Claus is coming to town, blasts on loudspeakers. Elves scuttle this way and that, making sure everything is prepared, shoving presents into sacks which are placed onto the thousands of sleighs. Mrs. Claus stands in the middle, supervising and directing the elves like an orchestra conductor. The elves, who look tired and ragged, smile brightly when they near her, but smiles fade when they leave her sight. When all is ready, the elves stop and watch as Mrs. Claus strides to the pole, wraps a hand around it, and closes her eyes. She starts muttering something, slowly raising in volume until it becomes a loud chant. She begins to glow brighter and brighter until she shines like a beacon. Then the glow shifts into the pole. The red, white, and green stripes of the pole start spinning, shooting light around the area. The elves become rejuvenated, gaining a youthful beauty and a glow of their own as the Christmas magic breathes life into them. Then the pole splits in two, creating a doorway which shimmers in between the two parts of the pole. Then all eyes turn to Santa's house. The door opens, and out steps Kringle, Santa's right-hand elf. He's met with great cheers and applause as he smiles, waves, and makes his way to the pole. He bows to Mrs. Claus, who kisses his forehead, eliciting ostensibly jealous moans from nearby elves. I picture Kringle played by Danny Woodburn, the elf from Jingle All the Way, but when I put his name into Leonardo, this guy shows up, so that's what it'll look like. I actually like the look anyway. Then, to the glee of the elves, a voice booms from inside the house. Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas! Jolly old Saint Nick strides proudly out the door, absolutely glowing with Christmas magic from the pole. Little Saint Nick by the Beach Boys starts playing as he struts down toward the pole, smiling, shaking hands, giving high fives, and giving the occasional ho ho ho. He reaches Mrs. Claus and gives her a big old smooch, followed by a soft pat to the bum, as is tradition. The elves titter and giggle. Then he stands tall and walks over to his reindeer, greeting them in turn. Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donner, and Blitzen. It's hard to say that without doing a Schwarzenegger voice since Jingle All the Way rocks my socks, but hey, look, I managed it. Once Santa reaches Rudolph, Mrs. Claus snaps her fingers, and his glowing red nose starts shining 10 times as bright, creating a powerful beam of light. Santa takes the reins and leads the reindeer towards the pole door, which still hums with power. Kringle takes his side, they wave, walk through the door, and vanish, with the reindeer close behind them. Moments later, the door flashes, and Santa reappears on the other side, followed by Kringle and the 9 reindeer. There is thunderous applause. Santa hands off the reins to a pair of elves, has one last kiss with Mrs. Claus, and walks off, with Kringle at his side, to the Hall of Champions, their new home. I mean, we don't know that yet in the movie, but you can know that because it's just this video. All is still. The elves stare at the pole door. There's another flash, and another Santa appears. He's followed by another Kringle and 9 more reindeer who all make their way to the first of the sleighs. Suddenly there's another flash, and another crew of duplicates exits the doorway, making their way to the second sleigh. This continues for some time and increases in speed until there's a constant stream of Santas and Kringles and reindeer emerging from the pole door. One by one, the sleighs depart with a ho, ho, ho accompanying each until they're all gone. The pole door closes once again, leaving just the single pole shining brightly. The scene changes as we watch a montage of the Santas landing on houses, going down chimneys, eating cookies, drinking milk, and, of course, leaving gifts under the tree. We do see a few accidents here and there. One Santa steps on a Lego, one trips over some toys. Accidents happen, but for the most part, everything goes off without a hitch. Soon the scene changes again, and we're back at the North Pole, watching the Santas and Kringles return. Those who have already exited their sleighs are standing around, at times congratulating their comrades, at others glancing around anxiously. The pairs begin to whisper to each other, looking around. The reindeer are led out back by elves. Mrs. Claus thanks them for their hard work, wishes them luck, then goes into the house. When the door closes, the Santas and Kringles draw candy cane swords from their sheaths. They raise their swords in a solemn and regretful salute. We hear the intro to that heavy metal Carol the Bells you hear everywhere. I'll do my own version, but it's not as good. Then they begin fighting just as the guitar comes in. Down, 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 down. Swords clash and the Santa Kringle pairs begin a deadly dance with skill and dexterity honed through so many years of battle. As we see the first Santa die, a bright blue cloud of light bursts from him, flying through the air before being absorbed into the pole. His skin quickly withers, his beard thins and shrinks, and he collapses. Kind of like a less gruesome version of the ending of Raiders. We see death after death, Santas and Kringles alike crumpling to the floor as their magical essence returns to the pole. It's a bloodbath as the pairs work in perfect sync to take out their fellow clones. After several bloody minutes with just 100 Santas remaining, the pole flashes again, and the fighting stops. The survivors are breathing heavily, some still in their pair, some alone, having lost their companion. The bodies of their fallen duplicates are carted away as the Santas and Kringles now form two separate groups, respectively. Now engaging in less hectic one-on-one fights, the battle takes more time, but eventually we are left with one Santa and one Kringle. As a side note, we could start with them separated from the beginning, but I kind of like the idea of them working in pairs. The pole flashes one final time. The two survivors are barely that. Santa has one arm hanging by a thread, and Kringle's face is mangled beyond recognition. They slump down next to the pole, utterly exhausted. However, once the elves have carted away the remaining bodies, and the blood-stained ground has been covered with freshly fallen snow, Mrs. Claus emerges once again from the house. With hardly a glance at the survivors, she wraps a hand around the pole and closes her eyes. Muttering becomes chanting, and the humming of the pole begins to lose intensity as the magic flows back into her. Tendrils of light surround Santa and Kringle, mending bones, closing wounds, filling them with renewed vigor. Soon, the humming stops. Mrs. Claus takes Santa by the hand, and a magical twist of light curls into his ear. He suddenly relaxes and gives a soft, distant smile, suddenly unbothered by it all. Then, they slowly make their way back to the house, with Kringle close behind. They reach the door. Santa and Kringle take one last look out at the scene outside, one which looks so deceptively serene despite the atrocities which had occurred just moments ago. Before the light curls into Kringle's head and cleanses him of his negative thoughts, he takes a moment to mourn his fellows. They were all gone, all dead. Or so he thought. Ooh. Cut 2, earlier that night. Flash! We see one Santa flying in his sleigh. Suddenly, Rudolph begins to sneeze, causing the light to shake about. Santa tries to keep things steady, but suddenly a tree appears in front of them. Crash! Flash! We see a flashback. We watch the elves toiling away in the workshop under the angry, watchful eye of Mrs. Claus. They look miserable. Flash! Nick opens his eyes and looks around at the wreckage. He sees Kringle's face. He pulls himself over and slowly helps Kringle up. Suddenly, the clock chimes, and we see a faint red light leave their ears. Flash! Santa is walking around the North Pole with a placid smile on his face. His eyes are glazed over. He gives the odd, soft ho-ho-ho, but is otherwise almost a zombie. He nods to Kringle, who has a similar expression. Flash! Suddenly Nick gasps and awakens with a jump. He had fallen asleep in his recliner in front of the TV. We hear commercials for Christmas festivities. Once he's collected himself, he grumpily changes the channel. He had been dreaming. It's been a year since the incident. Ever since the brainwashing magic left him, Nick has hated Christmas and everything to do with it, as it was a reminder of the things his so-called wife had forced him to do. Kringle is similarly jaded, but not to the same degree, since it wasn't his wife who had done it to him, and he wasn't exactly the star of the show. Nick looks at the time, curses, and gets his butt up to leave for work. As he's about to leave, Kringle yells to him from the kitchen and tosses him a sandwich. He catches it and leaves. They exchange some words, but come on, this is going into too much detail already. Nick is on his way to work. He's super depressed and dejected, showing many of the same zombie signs he did back at the North Pole, but for different reasons. He scowls at Christmas decorations as he passes and crosses the street to avoid carolers. Cut 2. Kringle! He's at his own job. He's a janitor at a school. He's taking out the garbage when he sees a few kids picking on a smaller boy. Kringle looks around, sees nobody there, and decides he needs to put a stop to it. The bullies turn and start laughing at him, calling him an elf, not realizing that it's less an insult and more a true fact. He helps the little boy up, and one of the bullies tries to hit Kringle, but he dodges it easily. All those years of killing duplicates has made him an incredible fighter. But the boys don't give up. The 4 of them surround him and attack. However, not wanting to beat up children, he dodges them in such a way that they end up hitting each other with the little boy watching on in awe. It's a great scene that I can't do justice here. In the end, they limp away while the kid starts gushing over him. "That was so cool!" "Nah," replies Kringle. "I shouldn't have done that." Cut 2. Kringle getting fired. He's in the principal's office, surrounded by the bullies and their parents. The boys claim he attacked them, and as their parents are wealthy and Kringle is a fairly new hire, the principal sides with them. Kringle leaves the office. Outside is the bullied kid with his mother, who happens to be a teacher at the school, which is part of why her kid was bullied in the first place. She feels guilty about what happened, thinking she should have been there. She also heard how brave Kringle had been in saving her kid and tells him about a security job at her sister's jewelry shop. They agree to talk about it further over coffee. Kringle has a date. Cut 2. The call center. Nick arrives at his job at a call center, and his annoying boss comes up to him, lecturing him about how he should be saying Merry Christmas in his calls. Nick doesn't like it, but agrees, and the boss watches him as he starts his first call with a grimace. "Hello," he starts. "I'd like to talk to you about your toner needs." His boss nudges him. He winces. "Oh," and he pauses. Merry f***ing... Cut 2. Nick slamming an empty beer glass on the bar. "Job sucked anyway," he mumbles as he drops a few bills down on the bar and stumbles out. It's still the middle of the afternoon. He stumbles down the street towards his house when suddenly there's a tug at his jacket, and he looks down to see an adorable little kid. "Are you Santa?" he asks. Nick pauses, then crouches down. "Do I look like Santa?" "Yes," the kid replies. "Well, do I smell like Santa?" Nick asks. Then he farts in the kid's face, who runs and cries to his mother. She takes her phone out and starts recording, but he just smirks, waves, and stumbles away. It's the first bit of joy we've seen out of him. He sees kids as partially to blame for his enslavement, so he's not a fan. Cut 2. Nick and Kringle's place. Kringle walks in the door and finds Nick in his chair, surrounded by beer and chips. It's easier to just give you the dialogue here. "I got fired today," slurs Nick, as Kringle slumps into his own recliner. "Me too," replies Kringle, a big old grin on his face. "You don't seem too broken up about it," replies Nick. "Well, I got another one. And also, I met someone." Nick turns and looks at his friend incredulously. "Like someone? Like a lady?"
"A very pretty lady," sighs Kringle, "with the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen."
"And you think she likes you that way?"
"I don't know, but I hope so. We went for coffee. She's getting me a job at her sister's store."
"Well then, I'm happy for you. But,
"Yeah, I'll watch out for magic mind control."
Kringle rolls his eyes. He's tried to be patient with Nick's relationship trauma, but it's gotten old at this point. Nick huffs, but turns back to the TV. Cut 2. Mrs. Claus, sitting in bed scrolling on her phone. She finds an article about a guy who looks like Santa farting on a kid. She clicks on it and sees a video. Her eyes widen. Uh-oh. Cut 2. An elf barracks. Tough-looking elves are training. Some lift weights, others spar. Suddenly a pair of bells on the ceiling begin to jingle, and they all look up. They're surprised to see it ring, but also pretty psyched. They quickly gear up and rush out the door. We see them arrive at the pole, where Mrs. Claus is waiting. She tells them there's a rogue Santa who needs to be captured alive and sends them out in their own sleigh. She watches them leave. She's quite worried. Cut 2. The jewelry store. Kringle is standing out front, working security. We see him get an odd glance from a few patrons, but he just smiles and nods to them. He takes it all in stride. Then, suddenly, a few men pull out guns and try to rob the place. But there's a wicked scene where Kringle takes them all out with just a baton and saves the day. I won't go into detail, this video's long enough already. But, as a thank you for his amazing bravery, the store owner says he can take something small for himself. He takes a bracelet. Then, Diane shows up with her son, Jorms. I don't know, I find the name Jorms funny. And Kringle hides the bracelet in his pocket, not ready to give it to her yet. She heard about the robbery and is there to console her sister, but is impressed. They talk about how people go crazy around Christmas. They reference the wreckage of a sleigh someone found last year. Jorms is worried, but the adults reassure him that it wasn't the real Santa's sleigh. Kringle, hoping to impress Jorms and thereby make Diane like him, gets into a whispered conversation with the kid, telling him that it was, in fact, the real Santa's sleigh, and that he knows Santa. Jorms begs him to meet Santa, and Kringle's reluctant, since Nick isn't the most charming fella, especially with kids. Jorms persists. Kringle takes a breath to respond. Cut 2. Nick and Kringle's place. Oh, one thing to note. In this universe, people really do think Santa exists, because it makes no damn sense that people don't believe in other movies. Like in The Santa Claus, if the parents think Santa doesn't exist, wouldn't they be a little weirded out when their kid gets a Santa present they never bought? It's dumb. So people do believe in Santa in this universe, but Diane obviously doesn't believe that Kringle is actually inviting her over to meet the real Santa. Jorms does believe him though. Alright, anyway, Nick and Kringle's place. Kringle is begging Nick to be nice. Kringle's wearing an apron as he's been cooking dinner for his guests all afternoon. He's invited Diane and Jorms over to meet Nick, and he wants him to be extra Santa-like. He even bought a hat, which Nick promptly threw into the fire. Maybe the scene opens with the hat burning in the fire. I think that's pretty fun. Unfortunately, there's a knock at the door before he can get any sort of promise. And when Jorms meets Nick, he is not impressed. He's not Santa. Sure he is. See, the beard, the hair, the belly like a bowl full of... Watch it. But he's not jolly. Nick, give him a ho-ho-ho. Absolutely not. Come on, man. I think he's just an old fat guy. Regardless, it's lovely to meet you, Nick. I'm sure it is. Okay, how about some supper? They all sit down for dinner. Nick eats more or less in silence, responding with grunts. Jorm starts flicking bits of food at Nick, who keeps dodging them and ignoring the kid. Finally, one piece is launched, and Nick grabs it in midair, quick as a whip. Then, without even looking, he flicks it back at Jorms, and it hits him square in the forehead. Jorms pauses, then starts laughing. Nick still doesn't look, but we see a small smile cross his face against his will before he quickly replaces it with a scowl. Suddenly, there's a crash, and the commando elves come bursting in through the windows and doors. There's a big fight with Nick and Kringle trying to protect Diane and Jorms, but the elves overwhelm them. We see, from Nick's perspective, an elf about to smash his face in, then cut to black. When his eyes open again, they're all tied up in chairs. The elves are arguing about what they should do with Diane and Jorms. One goes to message Mrs. Claus. Nick does some silent eye communication with Kringle. They're hoping to escape. Kringle's eyes motion towards the ground, then to Nick. Nick gets the message and slowly starts rocking his chair back and forth until he crashes to the ground. But the chair doesn't break. Ow. What was that? Asks one of the muscle elves. I thought, a chair would break and I could escape. Ha! It looks so easy in the movies. They get him back upright, then turn to the humans. Word from Mrs. Claus is that they are to take the humans with them so they can't tell anyone. Just as they're about to move over to them, a large painted egg rolls on the floor between the elves. They look down, confused, and then it explodes, filling the room with smoke. There are some cries and several slams, and when the smoke clears, we see the bodies of the unconscious elves on the floor. Above them is a large rabbit? No, as the smoke clears more, we see that it's a man in a big rabbit costume. And as he takes off his infrared visor, we see that his face looks just like Nick's. It's the Easter Bunny! Cries Jorms as their unexpected savior comes and unties them. It turns out that the Easter Bunny is actually an old Santa duplicate who escaped his brainwashing in a similar way to Nick. Wanting to swear off Christmas, but still wanting to bring cheer, he decided to bring joy on a different day, choosing Easter to represent his own rebirth, just as Jesus was reborn on Easter. You know, allegedly. Just as Nick got all grumpy and distant when he learned the truth, the Easter Bunny, who goes by Buns, just got a bit weird and eccentric. He's a fun character. I picture him doing that classic Nick Offerman giggle a lot. You know, just, that was not it. Something like that. Buns tells them that it's not safe for them and that they need to go with him. Diane and Jorms need to go as well, since they wouldn't be safe as Mrs. Claus would want to tie up loose ends. So they leave with him to go see his mentor, the White Wizard. Outside, Buns creates a magical egg, which cracks open and reveals a magical portal, similar to the pole door, which he jumps inside. The rest look at each other nervously, Then follow him. Cut 2. The White Wizard's lair.
Where are we?
The South Pole.
Whoa, really?
Nah, it's just Canada. We learn that the White Wizard is, of course, another version of Santa Claus. But he's even older. The original from before the times of the Christmas Wars. Before, he explains, Mrs. Claus stripped him of his magic and banished him from the North Pole. He was alone until he managed to shoot down another Santa one Christmas, who, as you may have guessed, hit his head, lost a few marbles, and became the Easter Bunny. The great irony of the White Wizard is that he has no magic of his own, but he has knowledge. Anyway, after a change of clothes, the wizard teaches Nick that, unlike the wizard, Nick still has intrinsic magic, that he can tap directly into magic in the air, while Mrs. Claus must use the pole to collect and direct it. And if Nick is to defeat her, he'll need to learn to use his magic. But Nick's not so sure he even wants to defeat her. He's out. Christmas doesn't need saving, it happens with or without him. He just wants to keep his mind, otherwise he would have just gone with the muscle elves. He spent the better part of a year convincing himself he didn't care about what had been done to him because he couldn't bear the sense of betrayal he truly felt. The wizard is frustrated, as this is what happened with Buns as well. But eventually, Nick is convinced that Mrs. Claus will never rest until he's brought back, as she'd forever view him as a threat, especially when Kringle pushes him to do it for his sake and for the sake of the people he's come to care about. So Nick agrees to train and take on his angry ex. Cut 2. The North Pole. The elf leader is reporting their failure. Mrs. Claus is upset. She decides to send in the 3, despite her elf assistant's protests. They're 3 older Santas from a great many years ago who have been so brainwashed that their minds have physically changed and no longer require magic to keep them from remembering what has been done to them. This means they can be away from the pole for extended periods safely. Now, as I said, they're older Santas from a time when each winner made a point to be unique from the others, so they all have their own little quirks, both physically and personality-wise, despite being the same person, who, again, I'm picturing as Nick Offerman. And honestly, the more I picture him in the role, the gladder I am that David Harbour and J.K. Simmons were ruled out, because I think Offerman would be perfect. Also, I'm still down for Harbour, Simmons, just saying. Anyway, we're introduced to each one in a short clip which shows their uniqueness. One has a bunch of animal friends, one's buff as hell, and, one's super into decorating. Just spitballing here, the idea is to have fun quirks which can be relevant to their good deeds. More on that in a moment. So she sends them off to find Nick, telling them they must be back by Christmas. Also, yes, I know this image still sucks. It took so many hours, and this is the best I could do. Deal with it. AI art is still not quite there. Unfortunately, Mrs. Claus failed to account for the fact that while the 3 couldn't remember their enslavement, they were still Santa Clauses. So as they're trying to locate Nick, they keep coming across people in need of help, and since they're so jolly and good-natured, they keep putting their search on hold to help people, especially kids. It's super adorable, and they're really confused by modern technology, which is also adorable. We have a montage. Nick is learning magic from the wizard. Kringle is getting romantic with Diane. Nick bonds with Jorms by using his magic to prank Kringle and Diane on their little dates. There are fun little moments where Nick and Jorms laugh together as Nick slowly warms to the kid. This is one of my favorite parts of the whole thing. I find it so cute. Also, in between these scenes, we see scenes of the 3 Santas doing good deeds. We cut back to them finishing up one quest, saving a cat or something, they start trying to find Nick again, then they come across another person in need and go to help them. Then we cut away again to the wizard's hideout. Rinse and repeat. Throw some cheerful Christmas music in the background, done. At some point, we have a conversation between the Santas. Nick, Buns, and the wizard are all chilling and chatting, and drinking. Lots of drinking. Eventually, their drunken conversation turns to Mrs. Claus and their various feelings towards her. The wizard has regrets. He could have been a better husband. He didn't listen. He thought he was the star of the show, but he's since learned that he doesn't need to be the center of attention to be happy. He was happiest when it was just the 2 of them, sitting in front of the fire, reading a book. She used to laugh out loud when she was reading. If I was in the room, she'd suddenly start reading a bit aloud because she liked it so much. Never really landed since I wasn't reading the book, but damn, it was cute. She just wanted to share. Sounds nice, hiccups Buns. Sometimes I'd hear her giggling to herself on the can. She loved her books. And she loved to laugh. Well, she doesn't do that anymore. Yeah, she just kinda walks around and scowls. Nick's pretty sure the wizard's just blaming himself and letting his loneliness get the better of him. He asks what actually happened, and the wizard made a point to be vague about it, and again he vaguely alludes to loving children too much. That he loved them to a fault. Nick gives him a look, and he clarifies, no, not like that. I just got a bit carried away with the magic. And the missus was a bit stingy. So, she took it. Nick's feelings are in flux. He still hates her for brainwashing him. At least, he wants to hate her, but he just can't seem to find the will anymore. Partly because he's turned that hate on himself. He doesn't like who he has become on his own. He hates how sullen he always is. He hates his natural reaction to people, especially children. He's not sure if this is who he always was, or if she changed him. If the brainwashing made him a better man, or if it broke him. The wizard suggests that it's neither. The wizard certainly wasn't like this. He always loved kids. So clearly Nick has been changed. But at the same time, he wasn't broken. He was traumatized. Not to mention, he's lived several centuries and fought in countless bloody battles against his duplicates. That'll mess with a fella. Also, they decide to talk to her first, see if she'll give up willingly. See if she's changed, if she's now willing to give up the power she once stole. By the end of the conversation, the wizard is gazing longingly out the window, thinking of his lost love, while Nick is lost in thought himself. The days go by. Nick learns more magic. The three continue their silly adventures, much to Mrs. Claus's frustration. They're about to find the wizard's hideout, but then they get distracted again. Kringle and Diane get closer despite the strange circumstances. I'm glossing over this a bit because, holy moly, this video is way too long already, but, there's more character development in this bit. Then, Christmas Eve. It's go time. They're all ready to leave. Kringle has his green outfit back on. Nick is in normal clothes. Jorms is disappointed. He begs Nick to wear his Santa suit. Nick says he doesn't have one. The wizard goes, "Oh, that's okay, I have one for you." Nick still says no. Jorm says, "Please." Nick sighs. Cut 2. Hands shove into gloves, feet shove into boots, a big belt buckle oh, what happened there? Okay, a big belt buckle goes on. It doesn't quite fit. He strains and sucks in his belly, finally getting it to click shut. Then, out walks Nick, as everyone applauds, which he hates. Jorms is glued to his side and grinning ear to ear. Getting the egg, he mutters as Buns conjures another egg to take them to the North Pole. Cut 2, the North Pole. Alright, I'm going to really gloss over this bit because battles aren't my strength and I want to keep some to your imagination. When they first arrive at the North Pole, an alarm goes off and the muscle elves show up ready to fight. But Nick magics them all into candy cane cages. Then the historical Santas and Kringles come running only to have their feet frozen in place. Finally, realizing her predicament, Mrs. Claus comes out of her house to confront them personally. She doesn't want to fight. She just wants things back the way they were. Alright, I'll act out this scene. Oh man, this feels corny. Whatever. I love you, all of you, with all my heart. But you're putting Christmas at risk. Please don't make me hurt you. You already have, replies Nick, and we've had enough. Give up your power or we'll take it. That's my Nick Offerman voice, in case you were wondering. Very well. I'm sorry, Nicholas. And they start a big ol' magical fight. Nick and Buns use their magic together to fight Mrs. Claus, who draws her power from the pole. They do all sorts of magic, like Mrs. Claus summons a giant kaiju gingerbread man, while Nick summons a kaiju nutcracker who fight in the background while they sling magic. The fight is intense and emotional. Nick, who gets fired up when he sees Mrs. Claus, is becoming increasingly frantic and angry, especially as it becomes clear that she is taking it a bit easy on him, as she has an opportunity to kill him and turns away. Unfortunately, Mrs. Claus's experience and dense pole magic give her the upper hand. Soon, Buns is out cold. Get it? 'Cause it's cold? And she has Nick on the ropes, his body slowly turning to ice. Just as things look most dire, Kringle, who had previously been looking out for Jorms and Diane, has a realization. He slowly sneaks to the pole, pulls out his sword, and starts striking it with all his might. Mrs. Claus sees what he's doing and screams, "No! She reaches magical tendrils towards Kringle, but Jorms jumps in the way and is flung aside into the snow, which enrages Kringle. We see a flash of regret from Mrs. Claus, but then she continues to reach for Kringle. He has mere seconds. He pulls the sword back, and suddenly, he and the sword begin glowing with power, spurred on by his anger. With a mighty swing, Kringle cuts clean through the pole, which explodes into colorful light. Mrs. Claus screams and collapses as the Christmas magic disperses into the night sky. "Oh," says the White Wizard as he looks up from an unconscious Buns. "He has magic too. Honestly, never occurred to me." Kringle sees that Jorms is okay and rushes to Nick and helps him to his feet. Then they all go over to Mrs. Claus, who is lying in the snow, exhausted now that her magic supply is gone. As he sees her, weak and frail and struggling, his anger subsides. Somewhat. He falls to his knees and holds her. He struggles to find words and can only come up with, "Why?" "It was the only way," she sobs. "I hated it. I hated every second of it. But you just wouldn't listen." "What? Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I wanted to watch my husband slaughter himself year after year? To be hated and feared by these elves who once loved me? Of course not." "Then why did you—" "I did it for you." She looks around. "For all of you. I did it for the world. For the children." We're transported into a vision of the past. We learn that Mrs. Claus didn't do what she did out of anger or arrogance or greed. She did it out of love. A strange, twisted love, but love nonetheless. You see, in the early days, Santa used his magic to allow himself to get to every house. As he became more popular, the number of houses grew, but so did the Christmas magic at his disposal thanks to the new believers. However, he started being rather generous with his uses of magic. He was constantly spending it on silly things, much the same way the three couldn't help themselves from helping others. But this meant that he was often running out of Christmas magic, to the point where he was unable to finish the run several times, leaving some kids without gifts. She tried to show him that his generosity was harming people, but he would have none of it, as he was rather arrogant and saw himself as the star of the show. He was Santa Claus, after all. She tried to suggest duplication, which would take way less magic than the time manipulation he used, but Santa couldn't bear the thought of not being the only one. So Mrs. Claus, who loved Christmas almost as much as Santa did, needed to find a way to ensure the magic wasn't wasted. She wasn't trying to take control of Christmas for control's sake, she was trying to save it. So she made alterations to the pole, which had previously just been decorative, allowing her to use it as an antenna for Christmas magic. She duplicated Santa, stripped him of his magic, and banished him, later becoming the White Wizard. Then she brainwashed the duplicate and wiped his memories so he'd do what she wanted and not spend magic willy-nilly. However, she soon found that even duplication wasn't enough, because if the Santas were alive, they burned Christmas magic and wasted it. So she started having a war on Christmas every year to allow the magic from the dead duplicates to return to the pole. It was the only way she could find. It killed her, but she kept telling herself that it wasn't really her husband, it was just his clones. As she talks about making these alterations, there's a flash of a scary-looking witch, but it's quickly forgotten, setting things up for the sequel. I see her played by Megan Mullally. More on her in a sec. As Nick learns the things she knew, feels the things she felt, he starts to cry. When the vision ends, he turns to Mrs. Claus and embraces her. She, too, breaks into tears. I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. I was just trying to help. I just wanted to save Christmas. I know. And I get it. I've kind of gotten to know myself this past year, and I'm not perfect. I can see this was hard for you. Will you stay? Asked Mrs. Claus. Will you be my Santa again? There's a pause, and then... No. What we had, it wasn't real. I didn't know you, and really, you didn't know me. Despite everything you did, I do still care for you, but I can't be your Santa. She sags, hope leaving her eyes. But then Nick looks over her shoulder and pulls away. But he might. Mrs. Claus turns and looks up and sees the White Wizard with tears in his own eyes. She rushes to him and embraces him, and he her. It's an emotional time full of regret and sadness and hope and joy. But then they come to a realization. With the pole destroyed and its stored magic dispersed, there isn't enough magic left to deliver the gifts. They gather all the historical Santas together, all the past winners, but it's clear they won't be enough, since they would have no magic to use when delivering presents, something which can't be achieved without it. But then, there's a light on the horizon. Then another, and another. We see bright Christmas magic shooting through the sky and begin to collect above them. They look around at each other, bewildered, as the night sky above them becomes a shining beacon of Christmas magic. Then we see 3 hours earlier. It turns out that in their search for Nick, the three Santas had gotten themselves into a Die Hard-style heist. We see another montage of them foiling the baddies and saving the hostages, again with Christmas tunes in the background. It's a blast. As they leave the building, bruised but victorious, they're stopped by reporters, and the story starts trending worldwide. They become famous across the world with videos of them spreading across social media. Hashtag Santa Saves and hashtag Santa is Daddy starts trending, and all those people celebrating Santa at one time, even those who didn't normally celebrate Christmas, causes a huge swell in Christmas magic, which soars through the air across the globe and flies into the North Pole. They may have failed at finding Nick, but the three accidentally saved Christmas. Back to the North Pole. With all this new magic, there's enough to make it work. The White Wizard takes point, being the most experienced with magic. Now that the pole's been destroyed, the block on him has been removed, and he's once again able to harness Christmas magic. So he equips all the historical Santas with enough magic to get things done. He even gives some magic to the Kringles to hurry things along now that he knows they too can wield it. Quickly, the many Santas and Kringles take to the skies in their sleighs. As they watch the other Santas fly off, Nick turns to Kringle. "What do you think? One more for old time's sake?" Kringle looks at Diane, who smiles and nods.
Why not? Let's spread some cheer.
The pair gets into a sleigh, then they pause. Nick turns to Jorms and Diane. "You coming, Jorms?" Jorms looks up at his mom, desperate hope in his eyes. She, of course, nods. "Just don't fly too fast." Jorms sprints and leaps into the sleigh, hugging Kringle and grabbing onto Nick and not letting go. Kringle and Nick share a knowing glance, then Nick opens his mouth. "On Dasher, on Dancer, on Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen." The sleigh takes off into the night sky. As they fly away, Nick cries out, "Ho, ho, ho, Merry Christmas!" We hear Jorms scream with glee as we fade to black. Over the black, we hear Kringle mutter,
It's still pretty messed up that you made us kill each other though, right?
1 year later. It's Christmas Eve again. We see an ad for a new TV show, The Three Santas Save the World.
Last year, 3 men won the hearts of the world. They saved kitties, they saved lives, and to top it all off, they saved Christmas, with your help. Now they've made it their mission to keep the good times going. House need flippin'? They're on it. Animal troubles? They're on it. Looking to drop that holiday weight? They're on it. The best part? When you watch The Three Santas Save the World, you're helping to provide Santa Claus, yes, the Santa Claus, with all the magic he needs to bring gifts to every boy and girl. So be sure to tune in every week as the three...
That's my Ryan Seacrest type. It fades off as we zoom out from the TV. We move to the North Pole, where we see a great many Santas loading into sleighs, as Christmas magic hovers in the air above them. One Santa is getting into his sleigh as the White Wizard approaches. "And Santa... I know, don't waste magic." "Right. Ho, ho, ho!" He takes off and we follow him up into the night sky. Then the camera pans back down, just as the first hint of daybreak creeps past the horizon. The last of the Santas has arrived. Everything stops. The Santas are milling around the pole just like they did at the beginning of the movie. It's awkward. The White Wizard steps forward and solemnly says, Well, gents, you know what time it is. Cut 2, the Christmas pub. We see glasses clink and beer slosh. Maybe it's milk, I'm not sure which I like more. Regardless, we see all the Santas having a big old Christmas party, with lots of cheering, singing, and a whole bunch of hoes. By which I, of course, mean laughter. Also prostitutes. Nah, just laughter. The camera pans out of the pub, over the field of snow, where more Santas and elves are partying, and into the Claus house. We see Mrs. Claus talking into the fire. A witch's head is in it.
I know what you've done.
He's my husband. I had to make things right. I never should have let you talk me into it in the first place.
You're making a mistake.
Well, it's mine to make. Goodbye, Mother. The face gives a harumph, then disappears. Mrs. Claus is concerned. Then, to be continued. I mean, probably not that, but guess what? It's going to be continued, and then that'll be the witch will be Megan Mullally, and then in the next one you'll get Nick Offerman and Megan Mullally, who's his evil mother-in-law. Come on, who can say no to that? Anyway, this has been Nick, or The War on Christmas, or Claus versus Claus, but I like Nick. Also, it'd be kind of fun because obviously Nick Offerman, so people will see the title and be like, Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed. This is stupid long, and I actually just got a Facebook message from my wife that I need to go pick her up from work, so I'm gonna just stop right here. Please, if you do want to see this, I'm way too embarrassed to actually tag people in it, but, you know, if you want to, I really want to make this, okay? I want to make this in whatever capacity I can make it. So if it can be a Hollywood movie, fantastic. If it can be a graphic novel, wicked. Whatever. I want all the Nick. I love this story. The bit with the 3 Santas at the end, oh, I love it. So I hope you do too. I hope you haven't been cringing throughout this, and if you're still listening, oh my gosh, thank you so much for bearing with me, okay? I'm gonna stop talking now. Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year, and Happy Hanukkah, but that's not the point of it. You know, happy holidays altogether, but this is a Christmas movie. Okay, bye-bye. Bye. Bye. Patreon.com/RonPon